everyone. We have a few people coming in, so we're going to get started here in just a few seconds. While we are waiting for everyone to join, I would like to just do a few housekeeping items. If you could keep yourself muted during the presentation. We will take questions at the end, but you are welcome to put questions in the chat box or the Q&A throughout the presentation, and we'll be monitoring them and answer those for you. Today's presentation will be recorded and it will be uploaded at our Retain Kentucky Media website in a few days following today's presentation. And we will also have a poll towards the end of the presentation. If you could just take a minute and answer those questions, we would greatly appreciate it. So with that, I am going to go ahead and get started. My name is Kimberly Wickard, and I am the Director of Organizational Partnerships with Retain Kentucky. And today, leading up to Thanksgiving, I am very thankful to have all of you join us, and I am thankful to have Kristen Dahl, who is a licensed professional clinical counselor and a master certified health education specialist, as our subject matter expert on creating a trauma-informed workplace. So our objectives today are to learn the 4 R's to create a trauma-informed workplace, and also to learn how to cultivate meaningful connections with workers who may have behavioral health diagnoses. And then our last objectives are keys to retain Kentucky's services that can support workers who may have behavioral health diagnoses. And I mentioned Kristen is our subject matter expert today, and Kristen is part of our team with the Human Development Institute, program manager and training and research coordinator. And she's also the Mental Health and Developmental Disabilities National Training Center. And again, Kristen, we're so glad to have you today. And we always reach out to our partners and employers and ask about topics that they feel are trending or relevant or that they have questions about. And behavioral health is really something that we hear very frequently as we've rolled out phase 2 in the last month. Just about every meeting that I have or presentation, somebody asks, you know, what about behavioral health diagnoses, or is somebody with that diagnosis eligible for Retain Kentucky services? And we do serve individuals with behavioral health diagnoses. And so we're excited to hear what you have to share with us today. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to you.
Great, thank you, and welcome everyone. I'm so glad to be here with you today and to have some time to connect and learn with you. As Kimberly said, I'm Kristen Dahl. My preferred pronouns are she, her. I'm a middle-aged white woman with long blonde hair. I'm wearing a blue sweater and blue glasses. I'm here today to talk to you about developing a trauma-informed workforce. I really like to have time to check in with everybody, but our time is short today. So I would like to say, anytime we discuss trauma, there is the potential for you to be impacted by your own traumatic experiences. So please take care of yourself and use the chat freely however you need to today. So we're going to start by put your one hand over your heart and take your other hand and put it over that hand. And then just take a big, deep breath and look at this adorable little red panda picture. And let's get started. I put a link in the chat, but here is the link for the course materials. This is a Dropbox folder that we can share. If you have resources you would like to see added to it, you are an expert. Share your stuff and I'll be glad to share it with everyone. So just add those to chat and I'll get those added to the Dropbox. So what is trauma? To have an understanding of why we need to be trauma informed, we need to understand what trauma is and how it affects us, our workforce, and our clients. According to the Substance Abuse and Mental Health Services Administration, or SAMHSA, individual trauma results from an event, series of events, or set of circumstances that is experienced by an individual as physically or emotionally harmful or life-threatening, and that has lasting adverse effects on the individual's functioning and mental, physical, social, emotional, or spiritual well-being. So traumatic events are sudden, they're unexpected, and we feel that they are dangerous. They're a threat to our physical or mental well-being. They're overwhelming and may make it difficult to manage daily life. And they're also subjective. They're defined by an individual's own experience and culture. My trauma and your trauma may be different, but we have all likely experienced trauma. I think having lived through and continuing to live through a pandemic has resulted in trauma for most, if not all of us. And at this point, I think it's safe to assume trauma when working with clients in your workforce. There are several types and categories of trauma on the slide, and to make it more complicated, we use several terms for the same idea. So you may have acute trauma, which is a one-time event like a car accident, or complex trauma, which can be over time or multiple events like a case of physical abuse. We have secondary trauma, secondary traumatic stress, vicarious trauma, compassion fatigue. Those are all pretty much the same thing. They're exposure to someone else's trauma. Social workers, many of you here today experience secondary trauma. Racial trauma, which are injuries due to exposure and re-exposure to stress from racial discrimination. And now we have climate trauma, which is anxiety, depression, and stress over climate change, extreme weather, and repeatedly observing climatic changes like droughts or floods. And we have sanctuary trauma, which you may not have heard of, but I feel like is very applicable to this group. Sanctuary trauma is encountering further trauma when you expect support or protection. So if veterans come home from a traumatic experience and they are expecting benefits and care, but there's a delay in that, that's sanctuary trauma.
Hey, Kristen, we did have a
Yes.
question in the chat.
Yes.
How would you label combat?
So that would be a traumatic experience that's probably, if you're in a series of combat, then it would be complex trauma, but it's not necessarily trauma for everyone. So that's dependent on the individual.
Thank you.
So our trauma leads to toxic stress, and stress becomes toxic when there's no relief. In the workplace, it doesn't matter if the stress is work-related or not. Being under constant stress changes the brain and its ability to function. If the body is continually stressed, it becomes fatigued, and mental and physical illness can result. Next slide, please. So let's talk a moment about our brains. We don't have the little reaction button, so I would ask you, how many of you have heard of fight, flight, or freeze, or your amygdala, cortisol, neuroplasticity? I'm guessing a lot of you have heard of those, so this may be review, but we have our reptilian brain, which is the oldest and fastest part of your brain. It's responsible for your survival, for your heartbeat, breathing. And then we have our limbic system, which alerts automatic nervous system to activate fight, flight, or freeze, and deals with fear and pleasure. And your limbic system houses your amygdala, which is these little almond-shaped parts of your brain, and they're your alarm system. The only job of the amygdala is to sense danger. And your limbic system also houses your hippocampus, which manages and stores short-term emotional memories, and your hypothalamus, which signals the body to relax when the threat has passed. And we also have our neocortex, which is the newest part of our brain, and it's the slowest. It's where reasoning and thinking happen. So when our brains sense danger, it activates our amygdala. In order to survive, our rational brain is overridden or kind of taken offline. We get a surge of adrenaline, and all our systems not crucial to survival are switched off. The hippocampus stops recording memories and starts to pump out cortisol, which helps keep us from feeling pain. So this system is really great if we're being chased by zombies, but not for prolonged trauma where our brain continues to set off our alarm system and we begin to get hyper triggered. And you can be hyper triggered by anything. So I have a really good example actually from this week. My friend took her son to get his COVID vaccine. He's 9 years old, about 100 pounds, really easygoing, calm, likable kid. He wants to get the vaccine, but he has a fear of needles. In the past, someone would hold him down to give him his vaccine and wellness checkups. So his reptilian brain is keeping him breathing, keeping his heart beating. His limbic system is enjoying pleasure from extra game time on his tablet while he waits to get his vaccine. His neocortex is considering what treat he is going to choose for getting his vaccine. So they go to give him the vaccine and he completely panics and kicks the nurse. They end up leaving without a vaccine, and he has a note that he will have to be sedated to get this vaccine in the future. That is a fight response. He was not making a conscious choice to kick the nurse. His amygdala was setting off an alarm and warning him that he was in danger, and he had been in that danger before, so that neural pathway was already set. He said he was afraid for his life, and he heard this rushing sound in his head that drowned out everything else. So will he ever be comfortable, or will it ever be easy for him to get a shot or get stuck with a needle? I don't know. The good news is that our brains have neuroplasticity, meaning that they're adaptable and can make new neural pathways by using techniques such as mindfulness and deep breathing. Deep breathing shuts off our brain's emergency response system, helps us focus, and calms our brain. It does, however, take practice. So you can't just deep breathe that one time and expect the reaction to be calm. Next slide. These are SAMHSA's 3 E's of trauma. The event, which can include the threat of physical or psychological harm. It could be a single event or repeated over time. The experience of events, which could be traumatic for one individual or not for another, like combat or deployment or living in extreme poverty. It has to do with how we assign meaning. It also has to do with the power differential with an individual event or force and what it has over us, like a tornado. It has to do with our cultural beliefs and our developmental stage. So maybe thunder is a traumatic event at 5 and not at 50. The effects of trauma, they may be delayed or immediate. They can result in an inability to cope with normal stress and an inability to trust. Say if it looks windy, then there must be a tornado. Difficulty managing memory, attention, thinking, ruminating. So you're living through the same experience over and over. And irrational thoughts. Again, if it looks windy, there must be a tornado. And also difficulty regulating behavior. So just like my friend's kid kicked the nurse, difficulty regulating behavior. Next slide. So this question is for you. What trauma exposure responses are you familiar with or aware of? And this is a long list. So if you'll post in the chat, and I'll go through a few of them while you guys are thinking about it. PTSD is one we hear all the time. Depression, flashbacks, can't listen, fight, flight, or freeze, constantly exhausted, anxiety, absolutely. Dissociative moments or just feeling like you're not there, you're kind of watching from the outside. Physical health problems, dread, the need to separate, definitely. Guilt, hopelessness. So results from abuse. So whatever feeling you had when you were suffering an abuse, definitely. Panic attacks, behavioral issues, can't deal sometimes with emotional problems, relational problems, PTSD, complex, abuse from bullying. Yeah, that's another really, really common one. Grief, yes. Can't sleep or stay awake. Can't make good decisions.
We also had secondary trauma in the Q&A box too.
Yep, definitely some secondary trauma is a trauma exposure response. Trouble in relationships, yeah. So this is all these things that we've said, and the list is much longer than that. Is what our workforce and our clients and some of us live through each day. And the results are safety hazards, barriers to employment, homelessness, poverty, reduced success at work, It's a lot of people going through trauma responses every single day. Okay, next slide. Workplaces depend on a workforce that is healthy. So how do we develop a trauma-informed workforce? You and your organization might ask, isn't trauma the responsibility of a mental health professional? If there is a mental health crisis, a mental health professional should be involved. But employers and workers can address trauma and avoid many situations by responding to individuals with safety and compassion. So these are SAMHSA's 4 Rs of a trauma-informed workforce. Realize how prevalent and widespread trauma impact is and how it impacts your workforce. The Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, or the CDC, recommends doing an overall health assessment of your organization to get a big picture of workforce health, including absenteeism, productivity, and healthcare costs. Recognize the symptoms and signs of trauma in clients, families, staff, and others involved in your workforce. Mental Health of America has free online screenings that you can take, or have one-on-one conversations and team meetings where you talk about this. Respond by integrating knowledge about trauma into policies, procedures, and practices. Understand that trauma affects everyone, directly or indirectly. Change the language, reduce stigma through training and leadership. Develop mission statements and handbooks that promote a culture based on beliefs about resilience, recovery, and healing from trauma. Include peer support and people who have received services who are willing to share their story, and use universal design principles. Consider lighting, access to exits, seating arrangements, visual and auditory stimuli, and availability of assistive technology. Of course, that list could go on. And implement small changes to create a culture of inclusion. Monitor feedback, monitor the impacts. Offer the mental health first aid course to employees so they can recognize and support individuals who might be experiencing a mental health concern. It's not about being perfect or being right all the time. It's about consistently creating honest, compassionate communication that generates physical and emotional safety and minimizes risk. Next slide, please. Okay, this is also SAMHSA information, and this is the 6 key principles of a trauma-informed approach. Safety, so staff feel physically and psychologically safe. Supervisors and workers work to create an inclusive environment that is calm, comfortable, and welcoming. Trustworthiness and transparency. So the goal is to build trust with staff and others involved in the workplace. Decisions are communicated about. Employees are not surprised. Peer support. Utilize stories of lived experience to promote recovery and healing. Everyone is treated with respect and their experiences are supported. Collaboration and mutuality. Sharing of power and decision making. Everyone has a role to play and they know their role to play. Empowerment, voice, and choice, which belief and ability of staff to heal. Trauma can unify. Shared decision making and goal setting. Strength-based language, strengths are identified and nurtured. Employees use their voice to raise issues on things that are harmful and help identify solutions. And culture and historical gender issues. Work through stereotypes and biases, respond to racial needs, address historical trauma. Work to counter biases, use cultural events to heal trauma and recovery. Some populations have experienced more traumatic events, so this could look different for everyone.
Kristen, one of the things that occurred to me when I had the opportunity to talk to you about your slides is with Retain, oftentimes our participants that we serve have a lot of emotion around, the onset of their illness or injury. And one of the things that we focus on is self-advocacy and helping our participants be able to advocate for themselves, with healthcare providers and in the workplace. And so I think that's very important that we're able to help them do that proactively, even though there's oftentimes a lot of emotion involved in that situation. And also, for the employer to be aware, and you mentioned a few minutes ago, respond with compassion, because that emotion oftentimes is really not directed at them. It's just what that person is feeling at that point in time. So I appreciate you, sharing this with us and allowing us to get a better perspective. And that's something we certainly focus on with our return to work coordinators serving our retained participants.
Thanks, Kimberly. That's a really great point. And self-advocacy takes a huge amount of courage. So yeah, it's very significant. Thanks.
Sure.
Okay, next slide. Well-being benefits have the potential to make employees more engaged and less likely to miss work and make mistakes. So ultimately, it protects employers from waste or fraud, and happy, healthy, stable employees can be more profitable. So this is Maslow's hierarchy of needs. I'm kind of going to go through this quickly. Just talk about a few needs that are and how they might apply to workplace well-being. So physiological is at the bottom of the pyramid. Are your employees comfortable in a workplace that's organized and inviting? Can your employees work with their preferred modifications, headphones or standing desks, or are there options for some modifications? Then safety needs. Does your team have job security? Are paychecks always on time? Love and belonging. Are your team members close to one another? Are you approachable around personal issues and feelings? Esteem. Is there a system in place to recognize and praise achievements? Do employees have goals, and do they have choice in setting those goals? And self-actualization. Are people challenged and given opportunities to creatively problem solve? Does your team have opportunity to learn new skills and have a clear path toward career advancement? Next slide. I am a mental health advocate. Try to be one everywhere I go. So, how important is mental wellness in your organization? Mental health affects how we think, feel, and behave, and is defined by the World Health Organization as a state of well being in which the individual realizes his or her own abilities, can cope with the normal stresses of life, can work productively and fruitfully, and is able to make a contribution to his or her community. We use the terms interchangeably, but poor mental health and mental illness are not the same. A person can experience poor mental health and not be diagnosed with a mental illness, or a person diagnosed with a mental illness can experience periods of physical, mental, and social wellness. Next slide, please. Success at work is measured by productivity, completed projects, financial gain, and other success measures. Ensuring mental wellness in our organizations benefits everyone and increases success. The National Institute on Mental Health found in 2017 that 17.3 million adults had at least one major depressive episode during the year. Depression can result in lost productivity, absenteeism, and affect performance and employee retention. Being mentally well involves being able to communicate and seek help, but many employees do not seek help due to the stigma attached that they fear when seeking treatment. More workers are absent from work because of stress and anxiety than because of physical illness or injury. And this has been exacerbated by COVID, which has made this lack of control, fear for personal and family safety just much more heightened. So, how do we increase mental wellness? Let employees know that mental health is important and treating mental health concerns is encouraged. Offer mental health coverage. Let employees know that it's private and confidential, and discuss mental health in conversations, which will really help to reduce stigma. Let's just normalize mental health. Most people who experience mental health concerns improve with treatment, and most recover to live full lives. 80% of employees who receive treatment for mental health concerns report improvements in their job satisfaction and productivity. Next slide. We hear a lot about being in the present and mindfulness, and that's because research is telling us that it's a big deal, that mindfulness is important. Mindfulness is being fully present and aware of what we are sensing and feeling in the moment without judgment or practice. It can be breathing, meditation, guided imagery, or other ways to relax. So when we experience stress, our muscles tighten, our breaths quicken, our pulse speeds up, and slowing down our breathing directly counters that response. It downregulates our nervous system. Remember, our brain's mindfulness practice over time has been shown to shrink the amygdala and thicken your prefrontal cortex, where you're responsible for awareness and decision making. So let's just take a mindful breath. I love to practice stuff. I know we don't have time to do much today, but let's take a mindful breath. So empty your lungs completely. Breathe in, hold your breath, and breathe out. This time, take a big breath in and feel your lungs expand, and breathe out. Allow your jaw to soften. Touch your tongue to the roof of your mouth, and relax your shoulders away from your ears. Breathe in a sense of well-being, safety, and acceptance of yourself and others. Okay, so that was just a couple of really quick breaths, but you did some things there to let your body know to calm down. I mean, let me know if if it makes a difference. I know every time I relax my shoulders, it makes a difference for me. Next slide, please. How do we practice mindfulness in the workplace? So we're going to go through the rest of these slides, just kind of touching them. You've got the slide deck that you can download, but we're going to run out of time. So we practice mindfulness in the mindfulness in the workplace by taking time together. There's several examples in Dropbox of like taking 2 minutes each day to breathe together. And now there's all these apps like Calm and Headspace, and they have personalized plans for organizations, and they have resources, events, reporting, and analytics. And the benefits of mindfulness are it prepares you for your day, lowers your heart rate and blood pressure, reduces depression, you can better manage pain, stress, fatigue. And then in the workplace, you can see new angles, think more innovatively with less distractions, and increased empathy, which is really helpful when dealing with people going through trauma. Okay, next slide. Depression and anxiety are the biggest mental health concerns of anyone in the United States, not just in the workplace. Depression seems to be very physical most of the time. Next slide. Anxiety is actually number one. It's the most common panic attacks, that feeling of impending doom and nervousness. Next slide. And then with trauma, PTSD, sorry, I'm trying to get ahead of myself here, is a really important concern. And this is your alarm system gets jammed, the memories get stuck in your limbic system. You can be triggered by color, smell, sensation. So what do you do with somebody if you're just an employee or a friend? You bring them back to their senses, just like we talked about. You ground them, start with a memory. Are you thirsty? And then relate that to memory. What did you feel just now? What did you hear? Use their senses, because that is the older part of your brain, and then work to the logical part of the brain. Next slide.
Okay, so we're going to ask for some participation in cultivating a meaningful connection. And if you could type into the chat how you think an employer can cultivate a meaningful connection with an employee and their workers in the workplace, and give us some examples of maybe how you have seen that in action, or how you think somebody could do that to connect meaningfully with employees. And I would say I actually saw something, here we have someone in the chat, by humanizing themselves. Absolutely, that's a great idea. Seeing a person as a person, not just as a means to an end. Oh, they're coming in fast now. By understanding and being respectful, modeling, making emotional deposits, finding out personal likes, hobbies, making an effort to talk about them. My boss knows I like chocolate, so she has given me some for positive feedback. Oh, that's a good one. Encourage employees to take time for themselves, self-care, fun group activities like cornhole games on breaks, empathy, asking employee how they can help or support them, listening and wanting to understand, having weekly check-in meetings with them, asking employees what they need, educating employees about trauma so that they can identify and ask how they would like these practices brought into the workplace, accommodating individuals, and asking if you're okay for no reason. So those are all great examples. And we got one more coming in here. One-on-one time with each employees about work performance concerns, feedback, conversation. And yeah, those are great ideas. And I think, with the virtual work that we've been doing, I know myself in my work setting, as well as other individuals have shared that it's really allowed for people to take that one-on-one time with people who report to them and with their supervisors that if they were spread out in the past, they may not have done. So those regularly scheduled meetings with the supervisor, go on walks outdoors together, and accommodations for these needs, especially sensory needs in the workplace. And I think, Kristen, you outlined those as far as some of the universal design sensory needs that individuals might have. So absolutely, those are all great examples. So thank you. And so now we're going to unveil Kristen's list. There we go.
Thanks, Kimberly.
Sure.
So next, I'm just going to go through the next couple of slides. We're out of time, so I'll just show them to you. One really good way to deal with trauma and with cultivating relationships, just so that your senses are in the present, is to do grounding techniques. And on the next slide, I've given you my favorite grounding technique. I really wanted to do it with you, but 5 things you can see, 4 things you can touch, 3 things you can hear, 2 things you can smell, 1 thing you can taste. You would be amazed at how this will ground you. And I had to have some dental work last week, and I'm not sure I would have made it through without this, or with counting backwards from 1,000 by 7s. That's also another one I do. Next slide. And this all comes together for resilience, which helps us handle trauma, stress, and we can think of it like a seesaw. On one side is positive outcomes, and we all experience suffering. It's part of our experience of being a human. Resilience tips us towards positive outcomes, even with a lot of negative factors. And we develop resilience through stable relationships and positive experiences and trying new skills. Thank you. I know I sped up towards the end, but I will give you those slides and share any experiences I have. You can send me questions or ask me anything. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. It's great information, and the information, Kristen did put that in the chat box at the very beginning, so you can go get the materials in the slide deck for that. And Brandon, if you want to go ahead and do the poll up, you read my mind. There you go. I'm going to just spend a few seconds talking about how Retain Kentucky can help with the resilience that Kristen just pointed out, as far as reducing sources of stress, loading that positive side up through social determinant connections, and strengthening those core life skills through self-advocacy support, employer support, and peer mentoring or support groups to be able to help individuals. So keep us in mind. We also unveiled an employee screener for phase 2 of Retain Kentucky. So individuals can have our contact information. It takes them through 4 questions to determine if they're eligible for services, and then they can just do that by scanning that QR code. They can call us, they can email us, and there's also an additional resource if by chance they're not eligible for our services. We provide them with an additional resource as well. And here's our information. If you have any questions and know someone in the workplace, or a friend or family member who you think may be eligible for or may be interested in our services. And as we mentioned earlier, our information is available at Retain Kentucky Media. So join there. You can rewatch Kristen. I'm going to go record her little just couple minute where she made us all feel very calm and relaxed, and keep that on my phone. So thanks, Kristen, for that. And we really appreciate you joining today. And we hope everybody has a safe and healthy holiday. Thank you very much.